What is the second best starter Pokemon? Oh, you're wondering why we don't want to know about the best starter Pokemon? Don't worry about that. Nobody cares about that. What a weird question. What the people really want to know is, who's the second best? Now, to be clear, this video is about competitive Pokemon. So if your favorite starter Pokemon isn't on here, that doesn't mean I hate it. It just means that the only reason I'd ever use it is if I was trying to farm YouTube content. There are 6 starter Pokemon that have been good to varying degrees in competitive Pokemon. So obviously, we're going to talk about 5 of them. All starter Pokemon have some things in common, most notably their abilities. All fire type starters get the ability Blaze, the water types get Torrent, and the grass types get Overgrow. Despite being called different things, these abilities are effectively all the same. They power up the Pokemon's fire, water, or grass type moves when the Pokemon drops to low health. These abilities, to put it nicely, suck. While they do come up every once in a while, for the most part, if your Pokemon is low enough HP that the ability is actually active, it's also low enough HP that you'll be taking a trip to the Pokemon Center expeditiously. The good news is that every starter Pokemon gets access to a second ability, and these hidden abilities determine a lot of how good each starter Pokemon can be in competitive play. For example, let's start with Primarina. Do people like Primarina? I feel like I generally have a pretty good idea of like how popular different starter Pokemon are, but for Primarina, I actually have no idea. Primarina is a Pokemon that was introduced in Generation 7, and it's the only starter Pokemon from Alola we're going to be talking about today. Primarina is a water and fairy type Pokemon, which is really good. Even though water and fairy don't have a ton of inherent synergy beyond water canceling out fairy's weakness to steel, it turns out when you stick 2 of the best types in the game together, you get something really good. Primarina only has 3 weaknesses, a rarity among Pokemon with 2 types. And even better, it resists 6 types and is immune to a 7th. Compare this to my favorite Pokemon, Exeggutor, and its 7 weaknesses, including a double weakness to Bug, and you'll soon see that not all silly Pokemon are created equal. Primarina is one of the only Pokemon in the game that resists all of the moves from both Urshifu, a Pokemon distortion world bent on traumatizing every competitive player. And unlike Decidueye, who made an appearance on my worst starter Pokemon video, Primarina's ability actually does something useful. It's called Liquid Voice, and it turns all of Primarina's sound-based moves into water-type moves, regardless of their original type. If you're not sure what a sound-based move is, don't worry, they didn't just add in another type that you've never heard of. Well, I mean, unless you haven't heard of the Stellar type by now. Some moves make sound, and for the most part, that doesn't change anything. It comes up sometimes because there is an ability called Soundproof, which prevents all damage from sound-based moves, and sound moves ignore Substitute, plus a couple other niche interactions. But for the most part, whether a move is sound-based or not is kind of like a tree falling in a forest when nobody's around. It doesn't really matter all that much. But it does matter to Primarina, because every sound-based move becomes water type when the operatic Ocean Dweller is the one using it. And this is a pretty big deal because of a normal type move that Primarina learns called Hyper Voice. Hyper Voice is somewhat unremarkable. It's a decently strong normal type move that hits both targets, but it's also a sound-based move, and that means Primarina gets to use it as a water type attack. Water type moves that hit multiple targets normally come with some kind of drawback. The most common ones are Surf, which also damages your partner, and Muddy Water, which can miss. Hyper Voice does neither. And actually, in Scarlet and Violet, Primarina doesn't learn that many better water type moves, period. There's Hydro Pump, which always misses when you need it to hit, and Hydro Cannon, which hits more often and is stronger, but requires a recharge turn after a connection. Primarina used to learn Scald, which is a great move, but it no longer can use that as of Scarlet and Violet. Primarina has strong moves that aren't water type as well, such as Moonblast, which is exceptionally powerful, never misses, and can even lower the special attack of anything it hits. Primarina does have some weaknesses, most notably its stats. That's a little misleading because it actually does have good stats. It's got respectable bulk and it's pretty strong, but it's not exceptional on either axis, and it's also pretty slow. And that's part of the reason why Primarina was at its best during the Dynamax era of Sword and Shield. Dynamax allowed a Pokemon to double its health and power up all of its moves. And while all Pokemon benefited to some extent from going big mode, some certainly appreciated it more than others. Primarina was one such case. It was just barely not bulky enough and not strong enough in its normal form, but with Dynamax in play, it suddenly became became terrifying. In Trick Room, slow Pokemon move before fast ones, and with Dynamax and a Life Orb, Primarina could blow through teams before they could react. It also helped that using the Water-type move, Max Geyser, changed the weather to rain, powering up future Water-type moves by a whopping 50%. This is actually one of the few times that one of the starter exclusive moves was used in competitive play. See, Max moves were stronger versions of regular moves, but how much stronger depended on how strong the base move was. A Pokemon using Max Flare based off of Ember is going to be a lot weaker than Max Flare based off of Overheat. Every starter Pokemon can learn a move that's basically a starter type version of Hyper Beam. In Primarina's case, that move is Hydro Cannon. I mentioned it earlier and how it takes a recharge turn, but when Hydro Cannon turns into Max Geyser, it keeps its high base power but loses the drawback. It's worth noting that while Primarina was very strong, it only remained relevant for a short period of time. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, when it placed second at the first Players Cup, the online tournament that replaced the official circuit when events stopped. It is a good Pokemon, but compared to the insane power level of some more memorable Pokemon, it does struggle to keep up. And you might struggle to keep up with this channel if you don't subscribe. I post a video every single Saturday, and if you want to be kept up to date, subscribing is a great way to tell YouTube to recommend them so you never miss an upload. Okay, so Primarina isn't the second best starter Pokemon, but maybe that makes sense because it also isn't that iconic. What about a more memorable starter Pokemon like, I don't know, Blaziken? Blaziken is a fire and fighting type Pokemon that tends to perform better in single battles, but it has still had some success in the official competitive format. Unlike Primarina, who tends to perform well as a balanced Pokemon, capable of both dealing damage and sponging hits, Blaziken is here for one thing and one thing only: damage. This actually isn't entirely because of Blaziken's typing. While fire and fighting is definitely a type combination geared towards offense, Blaziken only has one more weakness than Primarina and the same number of resistances, so it does lack an immunity. And this is nice because even though picking Blaziken means you're comfortable with it going down quickly, the decent defensive spread means if it's paired up against the right Pokemon, it can be like the last guest at a party and just refuse to go home. But the real strength of this typing is its offenses. There is no single type in the game that can resist both fire and fighting, making it very difficult to stop Blaziken from blowing something up. Of course, the typing is only part of the equation. The arguably bigger factor in Blaziken's offensive nature are the stats and the ability. While it has totally fine natural bulk, it definitely isn't great. Its attack and special attack are clearly intended to be the focal point, but that's not addressing the elephant in the room: Blaziken's speed stat. For an offensive Pokemon, it's just way too slow, and it's also just in this awkward middle ground where it's too slow to keep up with the really fast Pokemon, but too fast to be effective in Trick Room. But that's not factoring in Blaziken's ability, Speed Boost. Speed Boost is one of the craziest abilities in the game, giving the Pokemon it gives it a speed boost every single turn. I guess that's not shocking. This is one of very, very few abilities that can boost a Pokemon stats without some condition being met, and for good reason. Stat boosts are a huge deal in competitive Pokemon, and so for the most part, getting one requires using a move or giving up your item. That might make it a bit easier to see how being able to raise speed, arguably the most important stat, at the end of every single turn with no drawback is completely absurd. So Blaziken had a little use over the years, normally with either a Focus Sash to help keep it alive or a Life Orb to boost its damage. It was able to make use of both its offensive stats by using moves like Overheat and Superpower, with each move lowering one of Blaziken's offensive stats after connecting, which was less costly because then Blaziken could just switch to the other one. But if this were the whole story, Blaziken wouldn't have made this list. Fortunately for the Flaming Chicken, there's more to this tale, specifically Mega Blaziken. Mega Blaziken is pretty much just a strict upgrade, assuming you don't mind sacrificing your item and your Mega Evolution. Every single one of its stats is better than Blaziken's, and its attack gets a huge boost. It's also one of the few Mega Evolutions that can KO Mega Kangaskhan, the most used Mega, which mattered because Mega Blaziken could also outspeed Mother after a speed boost. Oh yeah, lots of Pokemon had their abilities changed when Mega evolving, but Blaziken was one of the few that got to keep its original ability. And good thing too, because honestly, almost any other ability aside from like Wonder Guard would probably have been worse. With the extra bulk from Mega Evolution, Mega Blaziken felt a lot tankier, and while it could still go down quickly, there were also battles where it stuck around turn after turn, continuously threatening to deal huge damage before the opponent could move. Mega Blaziken won 2 regional level events, including the Nashville Open, a tournament that took place at the 2018 World Championships and was chock full of World's competitors. It's a Pokemon that was never mainstream, but was extremely threatening in the right hands. Both Blaziken and Primarina were starter Pokemon that, while strong, were also never especially mainstream. That's not something you can say for all the remaining starter Pokemon on this list, who were all considered top competitive threats at least at one point. So let's kick off the big dogs by talking about a big frog, Venusaur. Venusaur's a grass and poison type Pokemon that just sucks to play against. As I'm recording this, I am currently preparing for the World Championships, and like if there's one Pokemon I don't want to play against, it's probably Venusaur. Just like Blaziken and Primarina, its ability holds the key to its success, Chlorophyll. This ability doubles Venusaur's speed stat if the strong sunlight weather condition is active, effectively allowing it to outspeed every other Pokemon in the game. But Venusaur's special attack stat isn't that high, so why is it moving before other Pokemon such a big deal? That has to do with a move that Venusaur learns that should be familiar to anyone who's ever caught a Butterfree: Sleep Powder. Sleep Powder puts whatever it hits to sleep, but it only hits 75% of the time, meaning using it is a huge gamble. That being said, if it does connect, the target can be unable to move for as many as 3 turns, which is a huge setback. It's not easy to get around Venusaur either. It's decently bulky, and even if you have a strong, super effective attack to hit it with, you need to get around both Sleep Powder and the Focus Sash item it often carries, requiring you to hit it twice to knock it out. Venusaur has really great synergy with Pokemon that set the sunlight up, because not only does it hit the water, ground, and rock type Pokemon for super effective damage that give fire type Pokemon trouble, and it doubles its speed in the strong sunlight, but the fire type Sunsetters also hit grass type Pokemon for super effective damage. And grass is the only type in the game that is immune to Sleep Powder. Even if the fire type can't help for whatever reason, Venusaur's secondary poison typing gives it an advantage against other grass types. Venusaur's base form has had a ton of success over the years, and was especially dominant back in the final year of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Pairing Venusaur with Pokemon like Primal Groudon, as it turns out, is really scary, since buying a single turn for the land monster to attack for free could often result in so much damage that the opponent could never recover. But those of you who are paying close attention and not just using this video as background noise to help you fall asleep, you are so valid, by the way, sweet dreams, might have noticed that I said Venusaur's base form. And that's because Venusaur has 2 other forms, both of which were more impactful than its base form. Mega Venusaur was the more tame of the 2. While it does give up Chlorophyll, it becomes much tankier and gains the ability Thick Fat, turning off its weaknesses to fire and ice. This Mega Evolution completely warps the way that Venusaur plays, turning it into this super tank rather than the normal fast and frail disruption role it likes to fill. Now, instead of needing Venusaur to hit a Sleep Powder or risk being wiped off the map, Venusaur could instead focus on sticking around and dealing damage over time, and could even lean into a healing build if it wanted. I won a regional with Giga Drain, Leech Seed Mega Venusaur that could whittle down my opponent's health over time, and other players had success using the move Synthesis to recover 50% of Venusaur's health at a time. But what really makes Mega Venusaur so good, in my opinion, is the fact that you're not forced to Mega Evolve it. If you wanted to use Venusaur as a Chlorophyll Disruptor Pokemon, you could bring Mega Venusaur but just not Mega Evolve it. In 2015, the German National Championships were won by a player with both Mega Charizard Y, who could set the sun up, and Mega Venusaur. If you wanted to use Mega Charizard and base Venusaur, you could do that, but you could also leave Charizard behind and lean into Mega Venusaur as a tank in certain matchups. But neither regular Venusaur or Mega Venusaur were anywhere near as scary as Gigantamax Venusaur. This Pokemon was a menace, and despite being around for only about 2 years, it quickly took over competitive play. Gigantamax Venusaur plays very similarly to regular Venusaur, which I guess makes sense because it's literally just a bigger version of it. And unlike Mega Venusaur, which is a permanent transformation, Gigantamax ends after only 3 turns. But don't let that fool you, those 3 turns are extremely impactful. What made Gigantamax Venusaur so scary was its access as one of only 4 Pokemon to the scariest Gigantamax move in the game. This move had a different name depending on which Pokemon used it. For Venusaur, it was called G-Max Vine Lash. This move was completely absurd. If you hit a single Pokemon with it a single time, even through Protect, both your opponent's Pokemon would lose a 1/6 of their HP over the next 4 turns unless they were a grass type. If you were to take max damage from this effect, you would lose 1/3 of your team's total health as a passive effect of using a move 1 time. It was also virtually impossible to prevent this effect from going up since Gigantamax Venusaur keeps the chlorophyll ability and doubles its HP, meaning you have basically no chance of knocking it out before it moves. Gigantamax Venusaur could also use the max version of Earth Power, Max Quake, to raise its team's special defense, making it even harder to get rid of. Gigantamax Venusaur became a top threat the instant it entered the game. It won the North American International Championships, multiple regional championships, and one of the Players' Cups, and it would have won a second one if I hadn't stopped it. The fact that it didn't even need to Gigantamax right away and could instead use Sleep Powder to disrupt made it even harder to handle. Gigantamax Venusaur was so oppressive that it makes other forms of Venusaur look tame, which is saying something. But Venusaur isn't the only starter Pokemon on this list with multiple forms. What, you thought I was gonna make a video about starter Pokemon and not talk about Game Freak's Golden Goose Charizard? Charizard is similar to Venusaur in that it has 3 forms that we're gonna talk about today, but it differs in that one of those forms is not its base form. Base Charizard is just bad. I did bring it to a regional one time, so I guess I'm qualified to say that. Its typing isn't awful, but it has a lot of weaknesses and will disintegrate if it touches a rock, and its stats leave much to be desired. It's not tanky, it's not that fast, and it isn't strong enough to justify everything else. Luckily for the lizard, Game Freak wasn't content to just let Charizard wallow in mediocrity. So starting with Pokemon X and Y, they gave it some help. Let's start by talking about Mega Charizard X. This Pokemon was never very popular, but it was very strong. It's a fire and dragon type Pokemon that gains the ability Tough Claws, powering up many of its physical attacks. Fire and dragon is good typing, as fire is strong against the fairy and steel type Pokemon that dragon struggles with, and dragon resists the water moves that threaten fire types. Mega Charizard X became a lot tankier to supplement its better defensive typing, and also gained a ton of attack, letting it actually work as a physical attacker. I brought it to the World Championships twice, and I won a regional with it back in 2018. The thing about Mega Charizard X is that although it was very strong, its most broken move was Flare Blitz, a move with recoil, and the more damage it dealt, the more damage Charizard took in exchange. Couple this with Charizard's speed stat, which, although good, wasn't faster than most other threatening Mega Evolutions, and it starts to become clear why Mega Charizard X never really took wing. Mega Charizard Y is a totally different story. Although it keeps the arguably worse fire and flying typing, it gets some useful tools to make up for it. The biggest one is its ability, Drought, which sets up the strong Sunlight. Weather is a really big deal in competitive Pokemon, and having a powerful fire type that can set the sun for itself turns out is pretty strong. Charizard Y had an advantage over other weather setters by being a Mega Evolution. Normally, if a weather setting Pokemon is already on the field, another weather setter can just switch in and turn off the weather. Weather. For example, if Groudon is on the field, Kyogre can switch in and turn the sun to rain. But because switches happen before Mega Evolution, this doesn't work against Charizard Y. If Charizard's on the field and the opponent switches in, say, Politoed, the weather would turn to rain, and then Charizard would Mega Evolve and turn the weather to sun. In other words, it's nearly impossible to turn the sun off if Charizard is on the field in its base form. Sun is a really dangerous weather condition because unlike sand or snow or hail, the sun weather condition powers up a type of move offensively. Specifically, and this is probably a shock, it powers up fire type moves. To try and balance the game, Game Freak made sure to build in weaknesses of the sun setters, whether via a low special attack stat like Groudon and Ninetales, or a low speed stat like Torkoal. The special attack stat matters a lot on Pokemon with the ability Drought because sun boosted fire moves that can hit multiple targets like Heat Wave and Eruption can be super oppressive. And not only are there no spread physical fire type moves, but you can always lower the power of physical attackers with the Intimidate ability. Mega Charizard Y is the one exception to this rule. It's extremely strong and fast enough to be a threat. It can spread damage with Heat Wave or remove a key threat with Overheat or Fire Blast. And and it gets the move Solar Beam, which hits the water and rock types that resist its fire type moves. Mega Charizard Y was a top Mega Evolution for most of the time it was in the game, sometimes being as good as one of the 3 best Mega Evolutions. It won multiple regional and national level events and finished second at the World Championships in 2014, ultimately losing to Pachirisu. But neither Mega Charizard was anywhere near as good as Gigantamax Charizard. See, Charizard was one of the other Pokemon that got access to that broken max move effect I mentioned earlier, in this case called G-Max Wildfire. But whereas Venusaur was threatening because it was too fast and bulky to stop it from getting the move off, Charizard was terrifying for another reason. This attack was one of the single strongest moves of all time. That might seem a little strange because Gigantamax Charizard just has all of Charizard's base stats minus the HP, which is just doubled. And I already mentioned how base Charizard is actually pretty bad. But here's the thing. Gigantamax Charizard would often use the move Blast Burn, the fire type Hyper Beam. So we're already starting with a move that's pretty strong. And just like Primarina, it doesn't have to worry about the downside of the recharge turn when it's in its Gigantamax form. And then we start adding in multipliers. This move gets 50% stronger because it's a fire type move and Charizard is a fire type Pokemon. It gets another 30% stronger because of the Life Orb item that Charizard would often hold. Another 50% stronger for the strong Sunlight, and another 50% because of Charizard's ability, Solar Power. Solar Power increases the special attack stat of the user by a whopping 50% if the strong Sunlight is active, but causes the Pokemon to lose 10% of their health every single turn while the sun is up. It's a strong ability, but I would say it's overall pretty well balanced because of the HP loss. Except if the Pokemon is Dynamaxed, that HP loss is halved. And that's true of the Life Orb recoil as well. You see, these effects cause a Pokemon to lose 10% of their base health, not their Dynamax health. And whereas the damage adds up pretty quickly when you're taking 10% per effect, it feels a lot less meaningful when it's only 5% and you have twice as much health as normal. With all these multipliers in play, Gigantamax Charizard could KO even Pokemon that resist it. And that's not even factoring in the G-Max Wildfire effect, which again causes both opponents to lose a 6th of their HP every turn for the next 4 turns. And that's not all. Gigantamax Charizard is the only form of Charizard to actually make good use of its flying typing. The single best base max move in the game was Max Airstream. In order to prevent offensive Dynamax moves from taking over the game, Game Freak capped the base power of the moves that raised your offensive stats much lower than other max moves. That's why Max Knuckle and Max Ooze were so rarely seen. They just were weaker than other max moves. But Game Freak forgot that speed is an offensive stat as well, and arguably more important. And Max Airstream didn't have this limiter put on. So Max Airstream was not only as strong as other max moves, it also raised your team's speed every single time you connected with it. While Max Airstream wasn't being boosted by the strong Sunlight, it did still benefit from Life Orb, Gigantamax, and Solar Power, meaning it could still easily wipe Pokemon off the field before you could blink. And dealing with Gigantamax Charizard and its partner, often Groudon, with a speed boost was nearly impossible. Gigantamax Charizard was the single best performing Dynamax Pokemon in Sword and Shield, period. It won the first event of the game's release and the very last, and placed second at the only world championships that happened during Sword and Shield. There's a very real case that you can make that it should belong in the #1 slot for the second best starter Pokemon. And if you think it belongs there, I don't blame you. But after giving it a lot of thought, I'm giving the title of #1 second best starter Pokemon instead to Rillaboom. And that might be a little controversial because I guess technically Rillaboom has less results than Charizard, but here's my thinking. Rillaboom was only introduced last generation with Sword and Shield, and it didn't even have access to its hidden ability for a time. Unlike Charizard, it doesn't have special treatment from Game Freak. Okay, technically it does have a Gigantamax form that ignores abilities and is a little bit stronger, but compare that to the G-Max form that Charizard gets and I think the favoritism is apparent. But despite having only one real form, Rillaboom has established itself as one of the strongest Pokemon of all time. Like every other Pokemon on this list, that partially has to do with its ability. Grassy Surge sets up the field effect Grassy Terrain, powering up grass moves, healing all Pokemon that touch the ground every single turn, and cutting the power of the move Earthquake in half. Grassy Terrain is a little lower impact than the other terrains, but part part of what makes it so strong is that you can use it as a way to shut down your opponent's terrain and disrupt their strategy. The ability is good, but it isn't the whole story. Rillaboom stats are great. It's got good bulk and a solid attack stat. And while its speed is middling, that actually isn't that big of a problem on a supporting Pokemon like Rillaboom. Rillaboom gets the move Grassy Glide, a move that was so strong they had to nerf it in Scarlet and Violet. This move gets priority if grassy terrain is up, and it's stronger than other priority moves to begin with, and it gets a damage boost from grassy terrain. Rillaboom also gets one of the best supporting moves in the game, Fake Out, which stops the target from moving for a single turn and acts with heightened priority. Rillaboom's speed stat also works in its favor because it gets the move U-Turn, which does some damage and then lets the user switch out. Bulky Pokemon generally prefer to use this move after the opponent has already attacked for the turn because it allows them to bring in a frailer, more offensive Pokemon safely. So Rillaboom is an excellent user. Normally, a Pokemon that excels at supporting its team and sponging damage tends to have trouble doing damage back, but Rillaboom is the exception. It can use the move Wood Hammer, a move with a really high base power to deal huge damage even without that much investment in its attack, thanks to the same type attack bonus and the boost from grassy terrain plus the move's high base power. This move does recoil damage to Rillaboom, but the healing from grassy terrain helps to offset that. Rillaboom typically holds the Assault Vest item to help shore up its lower special defense stat, but that's not the only option it has for good items. Players have had success with Miracle Seed to boost grass moves, Choice Band for a huge damage boost, and Clear Amulet to stop Intimidate, to name a few. I won the Players Cup 2, a national level event with Assault Vest Rillaboom, and also won the Charlotte Regional Championships this year with the same set. Rillaboom has only been legal for 2 World Championships, and its finishes are 1st and 2nd. It's won countless regional and international level events, and it's showing no signs of slowing down. In fact, as I record this in early August, Rillaboom is arguably the strongest it's ever been, despite the fact that it now has to deal with powerful, restricted legendary Pokemon. Unlike Charizard and Venusaur, who perform best when the entire team is built around supporting and enabling them, Rillaboom is a lot more selfless. Rather than work as the star, it instead enables its teammates to shine, making it much more flexible with the teams it can work on. Despite the nerf to Grassy Glide and the introduction of multiple new ways to stop Fake Out, Rillaboom continues to perform and has reached a level of dominance that I think is deserving of the number 1, number 2 starter Pokemon. And that's the last starter Pokemon I'm gonna talk about. Sure glad we talked about them all. Okay, let's end the video before it. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, you might like this other video I made trying to find the worst starter Pokemon of all time. It seemed like some of the Pokemon I was considering really surprised people, so just be warned if you're gonna watch it.